Hello everyone, this is Kyle from RomBee Resins. Thanks for joining us. I'm really excited to try making a jar from our resin jar mold today. These resin jars can make just beautiful, beautiful jars. And I really like just mixed colors, but I thought we'd try something beach themed today, which will be a little challenging to try and keep the different colors from not merging too much. But we'll start with mixing our resin. And this beach theme jar will have kind of three colors. The first being the darker blue ocean color, and then a turquoise cyan color in the middle. And then at the bottom of the jar will be a sand colored, which will be mica gold powder. And so I'm just mixing the resins into three separate small silicone cups that each hold up to 100 milliliter, because that way we'll have resin for each of the three colors. The resin we're using is Let's Resin casting resin. Really happy with this resin. Produces hardly any bubbles, and the bubbles that it does produce, they degas really well. So if you come back after, not so much in this mold, but in really any mold that has an exposed top that you can reach with a heat source, if you just come back like 20 minutes after it starts setting and hit it with your heat gun or torch, it does a really nice job of removing all the bubbles. I've been really happy with this resin. We did a lot of research, and so far this is the one we personally find the best. So you'll notice we have a couple colors set aside already. Two for the turquoise and two for the blue. We're going to mix the blue first after we get the resin mixed. So I'll begin mixing the resin. I mix for about 3 minutes. You could probably get away with 2 minutes, and this is a small amount, but I just like to be thorough. So I mix for a full 3 minutes with the paddle, and I scrape the bottom corners of the silicone mold and the sides as well a few times throughout the mixing process. Now we'll begin mixing our blue powder in. We have two colors, both from Let's Resin. They're pigment powders. The first is just a dark blue, and you can see I'm not adding much. It does go pretty far. And the second is just blue, which is more of a lighter blue, and you'll be able to see that in just a moment when I add this. You can see the contrast. That makes a nice ocean wave, ocean color. And then I did also put a bit of the thicker glitter in as well as an inclusion. We'll mix that up for just about 20 or 30 seconds. Added a little bit more color in. But that's looking nice. I'm really happy with that color. It's funny, it blends in with that silicone matte, but makes a nice ocean color. We'll set that aside, and we'll look at mixing the next color. So we have two colors here. The first that I'm picking up is a sea green from Let's Resin. Perfect for this application. Just start mixing that together. And the second color is actually called cyan, again from Let's Resin. Just take some of the darkness out. And I think in the end I had just added a little bit of the blue as well, just to try and blend that. And that'll give us our two colors for mixing in. I've waited about 25 minutes before we start pouring. And you'll notice I tried to avoid pouring on the top of the mold because that's the bottom of the jar. And when you look in the inside the jar, I really didn't want to see the blue. I wanted to see the sand that should be there. So I'm just trying to pour into the crevice. The reason I waited 25 or 30 minutes is because we don't want the two colors to blend together too much, so I was trying to let it set up a little bit. Now, I'll be putting some shells in. So I poured a little bit of resin in the bottom, and then that gives the shells something to sit in, so they're not directly against the bottom of the mold. You'll also see that I'm dipping it in the resin. These shells, some of them are sizable and they are hollow. So if you put them in the liquid, they're going to try and float. They're going to try and rise to the top. And there's only so much you can do about that. But by coating it, it seals it and helps it to be the same density. And so I dipped it in the resin before I put the shell inside the mold. And I didn't want a lot. I just wanted a few shells. And that way in the end product, you can see them from the outside. I had two tweezers that were available, and you'll notice I put the one away and took this one because the other pair of tweezers is metal ended and it's very sharp. If you try and stick that in this mold, you will definitely puncture a hole in it. It will get caught as well on the mold. So I grabbed the plastic pair for this type of application. Now I'll start pouring the turquoise color in. And it should, because it's a little bit thicker now after the 30 minutes, it should kind of set on top the blue. It shouldn't totally mix into it. And I didn't care too much about just going ahead and pouring it there on the top of the mold. I'll try and scrape some of that off then. Yeah, try and scrape some of that off so that when we pour the next layer of the sand color, you'll be able to see that in the bottom of the jar. And just aggregating it a little bit. But it's really coming together nicely. I think this will turn out nice. At this point, I just wanted to add a few more inclusions. I thought it'd be nice to look in the jar and see the starfish there. So just trying to kind of tuck that in. Now it's time to pour the third color in. I've waited about 4 hours for the turquoise and the blue to set. And we don't need a lot of resin because we just have to fill that final little bit and then also the lid. Mixing. Okay. So I found 3 colors that I think will resemble sand when it's done. We have gold. Yeah, it's hard to see, I'm sorry. Gold, pearl gold, and also coral gold. Those are all 3 mica powders from Let's Resin, and some of them are just a little darker than regular gold, so I thought they would go well together. There's probably nothing better to use to resemble sand than actual sand, but I don't have any. I mean, I wasn't going to go out back and pull some sand out of the sandbox. It's dirty. But I would like to do this again sometime and use actual sand mixed with resin. But for now, I wanted to kind of compare and see what it would look like to do a resemblance using mica powder. Yeah, that one's a little darker, the coral gold. And in hindsight, I really wish that I had not put as much in, because it takes away some of the transparency. You can't see through to see the shells as well inside the resin because there's so much powder. It's pretty opaque. So lesson learned in terms of just going lightly on the powder. But we learn from our mistakes. And we'll do this one and we'll do it another way, and then we'll try it a third way and be happy with whichever one. And again, I really wanted to be able to see, I really wanted to have shells in there, inclusions. So just dipping some in the resin to fill it and putting it in around the base of the mold. I did come back to this about 20 minutes later and there were 3 large bubbles. But hey, the nice thing is if you can get to them in time, like 20 minutes after it starts to set up, you can still pop them and the self-leveling will still work and filling it back in. So yeah, it actually turned out really well. Even when you add inclusions like shells or other things, it tends to produce bubbles. So I was really happy how few were produced by adding those shells in there. Although the shells did want to come up, they did want to float, so I had to keep pushing them down a little bit. It matters that the shells don't pop up out of the jar mold, because then it won't sit flat. But with the top that we're about to pour, that's perfectly fine. In fact, it's kind of neat. It makes it feel 3D. It looks very real then. If the shells do come up above the mold a little bit on the jar lid, so that was just fine. Now I put those shells in upside down, so that the outer shell is what's visible from the top of the jar. And plus the concave portion then would get filled in with resin, so that worked out. I'm gonna leave this to sit overnight. I'll put a box over top of it to protect it. And then tomorrow, once it's cured, we'll go ahead and demold it and take a look. Welcome back. I did go ahead and demold this morning. And here's our final product for our resin jar. Pretty happy with the way it turned out. You'll notice that the blue did stay toward the top and then the turquoise in the middle. And the glitter that we put in the blue also oriented toward the top of the jar, which is what we wanted. So with the lid off, you can see a good bit of the glitter art there. This is just some items that I did with the extra resin that I was putting in the jar. Looking inside the jar, you can see the sand in the bottom and no real bubbles to speak of. I did go back and add just a little bit of white resin along the middle to make it look a little bit like an ocean wave. But pretty happy with the way the colors turned out. And you can see some of the shells, the starfish there on the bottom. And the lid, that turned out well. Also, you get a little bit of 3D because the shell does stick out past the mold on the lid. You can see the starfish and the shells on both sides, along with that little bit of glitter that we put in. So here's our final product. I hope that this video was interesting or helpful to you in some way, and hopefully it helps you to do your resin jars. If you got value out of it, go ahead and please click the like button and subscribe so you can see more of our videos. Have a great day.